What's up, guys? This is Dan Wilson, and we're back for another design chat with Grant Maundrell. And today we're talking about earthworks, swales, and other water harvesting interventions. We've got a few videos today that Grant took on his recent project that was not too long ago where you put in some swales. Grant, thanks for joining us.
No problem. Happy to be here.
Yeah,
Yeah, it was, to be accurate, it was September. We did that earthworks, September 2023. So for us here in the Southern Hemisphere, that was early spring.
early spring, which allowed you to see them fill up pretty much right away after they were complete.
Yeah, it was fantastic timing. We did the earthworks, and then I think it was a week later, there was a 20 millimeter, so 3/4 of an inch rain event, and um, yeah, we got to see it all in action. So that was excellent timing.
It's amazing that a quarter of an inch can fill up.
3/4 of an inch.
Yeah, 3/4 of an inch can, but still, it can fill up those swales. Like, I mean, those things were full in the video you sent me, which we'll watch here.
Yeah, well, depending on their catchment, um, it's like a pond or a river or a swale. Whatever catchment is above it, um, is going to dictate sort of how that rain event translates to filling something up. So if you've got enough catchment, enough runoff, yeah, it can really add up quickly because you've got. I mean, on this particular property, they even have the neighboring road and property draining into them, and so yeah, their catchment goes beyond their property as well. Which is what's been causing erosive problems and why we've intervened. But I think it was, in that in itself is a classic permaculture. The problem is the solution. The problem was all this water coming onto the property. Well, we can turn that into the solution.
Absolutely. And on that project, you did 3 swales. Is that correct?
Technically, it was 4, but yeah, 2 of them were sort of smaller and in conjunction with each other a little bit. But yeah, 4 swales, 2 fairly lengthy ones, and another 2 that went through an existing orchard that will in the future get converted into a food forest system.
Oh, you went through an existing orchard with the swale.
Yeah, the video we're probably about to see is in that area. You'll see the fruit trees that we're sort of dancing in between with regards to the earth, the excavator. The trees were just planted in a very conventional way, in a grid, surrounded by grass. So we've intervened with some swales, but eventually the grass will go and support species will go in. But that's another story for another day. Yeah.
Right on. I think it's just good to talk about, since our last episode we did for this channel, we talked about my property here and kind of just looked at a bird's eye view of it, looked at which way the water was moving, talked about some ideas of what we could do. But now we want to talk about actually a little bit how to do it from a technical standpoint. I think that's a big question for a lot of people. They get the idea of a swale or a basin, but when it comes time to actually planning them and doing it, they might need a little bit more help, like I certainly do.
Yeah. Well, I
And
mean, I think there's a couple of sticking points. Firstly, if you've never seen one before, which obviously having seen a video of it being built or just one installed, then furthermore seeing one fill up, and so you see what you're actually wanting it to do ultimately. And the other thing too is there's no sort of prescription about it. I can't tell you dig it this deep and this dimension and or put it here or there. So it's easy to get sort of analysis paralysis in that sense, because you sort of go towards, okay, well, if I'm going to do it, suddenly you're faced with all the specifics of what exactly you're going to do. And the next person can look at what I've done and go, oh, I would have done it slightly differently and whatever. I think there's no hard and fast rules, but there's guiding principles. If you're slowing the water down, if you're allowing it to soak into the groundwater profile, then you're achieving those sort of basic principles. We can have arguments about the nuance about size and exact location as to what might be able to improve or best harness the circumstance or whatever. But yeah, I suppose it's doing something is better than nothing in terms of, if you're again working towards those basic principles of slowing the water down, harvesting water, etc. One of our swales, we sort of roughly calculated, and forgive the metric for our Americans out there, it was about 100 meters of swale was capturing in that one rain event 15,000 liters of water, which, go away and do the maths, but the upshot is that's a lot of water that would have otherwise run off and gone into the nearby creek or wherever, that's gone into the landscape and created a greater water resilience to the property.
yeah, I think that you mentioned the part about there's no exact prescription on how deep or where, but you do sort of have a specific process of finding the points where you would draw a line, and there's like a dance, and there's a dance between these tools you're using, the laser level, which you don't have to use a laser level, but that's a convenient tool, and the excavator, and you have basically a 2-person operation using these tools to find your points, and then you cut in basically, and we'll go over that with the video. But I think it's worth noting that is kind of the process. And it brings me back to the point, I just been thinking about this point while you were talking, that it helps when the person designing the water catchment system is also the person who's implementing it. Like what you've said before, your designs are for you as a means to an end of getting the job done. So I guess I'll just ask you this question real quick. Is it, in terms of process, and maybe there's no exact answer, if you were doing a design for a water catchment or a water harvesting plan, would you bust out your laser level and mark the points before you went to the paper and drew it all down? Or is it kind of like what we did in the last conversation, where we we think we know where the water is going to go. We think we know where the swales should go. So we draw a line that's sort of a estimated line, but it's not until we're actually going to dig the swales where we'll get those exact lines. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think unfortunately the answer again is a bit, it depends.
Mm-hmm.
It depends on what information you've got to begin with. So if you've got fairly detailed survey information, or it's fairly obvious because of the slopes or whatever, then it's pretty easy to do it on paper and sort of go, well, I'm trusting this survey information here. I've got contour lines to work with or whatever. I know that if I start a swale here, I'll end up over here. I can then sort of broadly calculate what catchment, whether it's going to intersect things we don't want it to intersect or go where we do want it to go, whatever the case may be. Having said that, you would still on site when you go to dig, break ground, verify it on site. If you don't have that survey information, or there's some nuance or critical bits and pieces that you're going to need to check on site before you sort of plan anything, then yeah, you can do it that way as well. It's again, that's what I mean by it depends. It depends on the site. If you've just got like at your place, it's a pretty blank canvas. So whether a swale is 3 feet that way or that way, it's probably not going to matter too much unless it's going to hit the house or those 3 trees that are at the top or whatever the case may, the few objects you have. But sort of through the middle of your property, say, for instance, it's not really going to matter too much. So we can pretty confidently on paper sort of map it out and then sort of go for it. If there's, say there's an existing pond that you're wanting to link in with and you're not quite sure how it's going to wind it, a swale would wind its way through on contour to another immovable object, say a house or a rocky bouldered cliff, or something that's going to be an obstacle, a fence or whatever, then trusting what's on paper is going to be a little more risky. Getting out with a laser and verifying on site is probably needed in that case. So I hope that answers the question. But yeah,
It does, yeah.
But again, you're going back to the basic principles that the contour has to be on contour. It has to be all level, and the water will tell you if you haven't done it, because the water will sit level. We don't want the water draining out one end or the other. It's not a ditch. It's not a river. It's not a creek. It's a contour swale. We want the water to sit passively and not move. And the movement is it's soaking in. We can, the way it moves out of a swale would be via a spillway. So it fills up to a certain level, and then we can work out where we want it to be redirected once it reaches that capacity. So you're always working on contour, and then the size of it, as in the depth and the width of the actual channel that's going to hold the water, that's going to be dependent on your climate. So how much rain you typically are going to get in a rain event, a typical rain event, or an extreme rain event, or regularly, or those sorts of things. The soil will have a little bit of a factor, whether it's really sandy or if it's really clay. They're going to hold the water for longer or less. And then also the catchment. So, how much water, how much catchment area is being drained into this swale. Therefore, what volume are we expecting? And I find you don't have to get bogged down too much in trying to work that out too precisely, but being able to have some sort of feel for it is important. The other way you can do it, which I've been recommended, which is probably something for people doing things themselves on their own properties, is start at the top of the slope, and you can build one and see what happens. And if you feel like it's overflowing too easily, you can dig it out more. Or if it's hardly catching anything, maybe you've put it too high. And then you can sort of adjust what you do further down the hill or continue on or whatever. So there's room for adjusting things as well to an extent. So if you start small, you can then expand your system once you're confident that that little bit's worked. But you always start at the top of the hill with that, because the top of the hill is where the top swale won't change as far as what its catchment is. If you start at the bottom of the hill, it's catching everything that you might add several swales to change what its catchment is, in a sense. So, yeah.
So the lesson there is start at the top. Hold it at the top, start at the top. Work your way down.
Yeah, because we're working with gravity. So we always start at the top. And on this property that we did these swales here in Australia, we weren't just doing water harvesting, we were also wanting to create fertility cycles. And that the way fertility moves is via water. Rain runs and leaches things out. Things get suspended, nutrients and so forth get suspended in water and moves around, be it in the ground, above the ground, or by animals and things. But in the sense of what we're wanting to intervene with, between about water movement. So we're also wanting to start at the top of the hill, so that whatever fertility and water we accumulate at the top of the hill, gravity's always on our side as far as feeding the rest of the property.
And that would extend all the way to other elements of design, like where you would put your chickens, or make
chickens
compost,
or any other intensive animal system is going to accumulate fertility. So if you can put them as high up your system as possible, then that fertility is going to be washed down to the rest of your property and to be to your benefit. If they're at the bottom of your system, again, if we used your property as an example, I know that right at the bottom corner of your property, water traditionally is accumulated and then gone into the neighbor's property and created a fairly, relatively, for a desert climate, lush sort of zone. And if we were to put chickens or something right at your bottom corner, all we'd be doing is adding their fertility to the neighbor's area adjacent. Again, if we put them at the top of your property, all that fertility is going to go through your property before it then goes into the neighbor's property. So it obviously makes sense to utilize the residue of your chicken system than not. I mean, obviously there's practicalities that may mean you can't put everything at the top of the hill or whatever. That's fine, but you're designing things with that in mind. And the swales are a way of distributing that too. So we had a gully at the top of a gully was forming at the top of the property, and in the actual gully itself, there was sort of decent grass growing, and on the ridges either side, we were finding pasture was struggling, and there were a lot of plants that were coming in that were repair plants that were mostly suited to very harsh, denuded sort of situations and environments. So it was reading the landscape, it was telling us that the ridge tops were being depleted of water and fertility, and they were declining in productivity and ecological function. So the swale, by virtue of holding water on contour that traversed both ridges and the gully, meant that the water wasn't going into the gully straight away. It was being held evenly distributed across both ridges and the gully. So what that will do is actually water those ridges when otherwise it wouldn't. And the clients have actually noticed, or the next swale down, exactly the same thing is occurring. It's still on the same gully. The clients have noticed that they've got a track that runs across that gully, and it's not as boggy already, which they typically see it being boggy and hard to traverse after a rain event that we just spoke about. So you're already seeing that the water's being distributed a bit more evenly rather than just being funneled into that gully and creating a boggy sort of situation, and probably a really dry ridge line either side. So
balancing it
yeah,
out.
you're removing those extremes of a dry area and a boggy area, and it's rain and it's all wet, then it all dries out. You're moderating the water distribution as far as its coverage, but also the time distribution, as in it's taking a lot longer for the water to dry out and disappear, and also slower for it to run across the landscape.
Yep. Maybe we should show some photo or video as a visual aid. Do you think we should would you rather see the full swale first, or should we get right into process? Maybe let's show the full thing first, just for visual aid sake, because it is hard what you said before about you're presented with all the specifics. And again, someone can tell me about a swale. I can watch a great Jeff Lawton animation, but I honestly haven't really seen swales in my life that fill up. I just haven't before. I think they're new to me. I haven't heard of a swale until 2020. And I would say, at least here, most people don't. Maybe it's growing. These
No, but
ideas. Yeah,
it's not ubiquitous enough to sort of be completely common knowledge, or, as you say, common to have seen one in action or whatever. Absolutely. So yeah, I think even if you are interested in them, it doesn't mean that you've seen one in action, that's for sure.
exactly. So I think it's helpful to see them. And that was kind of the point of the videos, to see them, what the end product is, and then basically like try to demystify the process and make it something where the average person interested in permaculture and earthworks, it's not that mystical. There's a process for doing it. It has its technical boundaries, and you follow the steps, and hopefully we can hash it out a little bit.
Yeah.
All right, I'm going to share my screen. Can you see the video?
Yes. Oh, so that's the one that's already full.
Yeah. Do you want to see that? I can put something else
Whatever,
on.
whatever you want. Whatever you want.
All right, I'll just play it. So this was after a rain event.
Yeah. So this is after the rain event. This is actually the lower one, and you can see. Oh,
Oh, sorry, I'll go back.
yep. So this is the lower one. You can see that we're looking across that gully that I was just speaking about. It's a bit hard to make out, but on the far side of the screen, you can see the swale continues across the other side of the gully.
You're talking about over here, up on the left side of the screen,
So that's the point of the gully there. And if you continue to the right of screen with your cursor,
like that, or
no,
this
just
way.
if you just hold it there,
Okay.
and then if you just look at the background, you can see those trees.
Mm-hmm.
But then in front of those trees, you can just make out the swale where it goes across the front of those trees. Yeah, right there
Okay.
with your cursor. And so it's in this sort of horseshoe shape because it's a gully. Um, like when we're reading contour lines on a plan, if you see the lines sort of create these, well, depending on your perspective, concave or convex shapes, it means there's either a gully or a ridge. And um, so similarly, our swales form the same sort of patterning. And yeah, that water that you can see in the front of the screen, the foreground of the shot, would not otherwise be sitting there. You can see that the ground is pretty compacted with horses and stuff around there. So that water is being held there. And it took a few days for it to soak in, but it soaked into the ground. Um, whereas if that swale wasn't there, in a matter of minutes, at the most hours, that water would have drained into that gully that's just beyond that electric fence that you can see. And that shows the function of it.
So basically, this was a dry area that's now getting saturated with water every time it rains.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's going to have a major effect on. Okay.
This area is a bit of a sacrificial area. So this property here, it's a rehabilitation um, farm for horses. So there's horses that are constantly in this area, and they can't rest the area. That's why it's bare. And they're monitoring their feeds and so forth with hand feeding. They're not allowing them out to graze whilst they're in this particular area.
Mm-hmm.
And so we needed to do something they were having a lot of erosion and so forth that comes with a bare area like this. And to the left of screen, which you won't be able to see, there's a shed and a driveway that was all sort of draining into this area. So this is also about erosion control as well. But there's obviously multi purposes to these things. But that was sort of, this area will remain a fairly sacrificial bare area, but we'll be able to slow erosion here. And obviously the landscape below is not going to get bombarded with sediment and sort of flash flooding, and the erosion is not going to continue further down because of this intervention.
Got it. Um, Now I understand the sacrificial, what you mean. This is always going to be trampled on by horses.
Yeah. So this is where, you know, when I say answers, like it depends. So like a different property where you've got no horses and you're chicken farmers or something, or, you know, uh, it's some other sort of production and purpose to the property, you might do things slightly differently, or there might be different reasons for why you're doing things. These people care about their landscape, but they're I suppose their primary business concern is the care of horses. Obviously, having a healthy landscape is always going to benefit whatever you're doing, including looking after horses. And you can see in that shot, there's horses in the background on pasture that they're feeding. There, yeah, exactly. So they want areas where they have the ability to do that, but they also have these sacrificial areas where horses are having more intensive care. They're deliberately taken off pasture for reasons of that they know better than me, but it's to do with monitoring their feeds as far as their sugar intake levels and so forth. So they're able to hand feed in this area, but they didn't want to see their landscape to degrade, and they were seeing that signs of that. So the idea is that we've intervened here without compromising the function of their business. We're improving the function of the landscape, which ultimately will assist what their business can offer as far as a healthy landscape for their horses to be in.
Yep. Cool. Let's check out the next one. I'll just let it roll. So is this the same property, different area?
I think that's the same swale, but that's right at the gully point.
Mm-hmm.
And so now we're moving around to that, what was on the background of the previous shot. And you can see there's a big pile of horse manure there. That's been placed above the swale. So that's fertility that will leach into the swale water, and then that in turn will leach into the paddock below and feed the pasture below. There's a better shot of the pile of fertility. And yeah, you're just getting a closer look at what's happening. There's a pipe and a crossing so that horses can walk over this, or their farm vehicles can go over the swale without injuring a horse. But also the horses, if you let horses continually walk over swales, they will trample the berm side, because we don't compact the berm side. So if horses would compact it, and it would basically create a spillway by trampling it down, and creating basically a deletion of the berm at that point. So that pipe and rocky road base has allowed a traverse of the swale at that point. And also that's why it's fenced off, so the horses can't get in there, as you can see here.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Obviously, these are pretty fresh, so you can see the berms are just dirt at the moment, but over time they will grass up.
You just dug these and it's
a week
yeah.
prior to this video, exactly. I mean, another thing, in an ideal world, you also can add trees to these systems as well. So you can plant trees on the low side of the berms. In really desert climates, you can plant trees slightly in the swales. Um, what that can do is also just add shade and dropping fertility, and well, trees that can also take use of the water, make use of the water, but trees go hand in hand with these systems as well. A
It's
lot of
a tree system, like you've said before.
yeah, I mean the that's not always practical, or you know, if you've got kilometers or miles of these systems, planting it all out with trees may not be practical, but um, you can see there's a fair bit of treed environment around. In this, while we're looking at this shot, it's a bit of an more open paddock area, but um, that's fine. The particularly the swale above this one, it goes through quite a woodland situation. But then we've just gone and planted 400 trees in the upper section. Firstly, as a priority, being at the high side, it was the area that was being degraded the most. And so we're trying to aggregate it with revegetation. Also, the more fertility we accumulate via the forest system that will grow there at the highest point, the better. So that's where we've concentrated our plantings. But in theory, we could plant along this swale as well. But of course, you're always weighing up resources and time, money, and effort.
Yep. Well, hey Grant, we got 1 minute and 30 seconds left. We're gonna have to do 2 clips here. So
Yep.
let's just end it here, and I'll send you a new link, and I'll just cut them up, and it'll be nice and clean. So
I'll click on the new link.
all right. Thanks.